Greetings, Bib 1001. Hope you are doing well today. This is the lecture that is replacing the Zoom session we were supposed to have yesterday, September 15th, on Tuesday. And we're going to be looking at Genesis 11:27 through 12:10 in this lecture, actually 12:9. And this is the account of when God begins to call Abram and makes a pretty incredible promise to him. So in case you're wondering, my father-in-law, he's hanging in there. We think we're down to just a matter of hours that he'll still be in this world, in the land of the living. So soon he'll be passing on to glory. Appreciate your prayers, and all is well. So want to kind of get caught up. And so our text today, what I would have been lecturing on yesterday, what we would have been looking at in Zoom, is basically chapter 12, but we're going to go ahead and get started at verse 27 of chapter 11. Now, these are the generations of Terah. Terah fathered Abram, Nahor, and Haran. Haran fathered Lot. Haran died in the presence of his father Terah in the land of his kindred in Ur of the Chaldeans. And Abram and Nahor took wives. The name of Abram's wife was Sarai, and the name of Nahor's wife Milcah, the daughter of Haran, the father of Milcah and Iscah. Now, Sarai was barren. She had no child. Really important point to pick up on, that Sarah was barren. She and Abram had no children. We go on, 11:31. Terah took Abram his son and Lot the son of Haran his grandson, and Sarai his daughter-in-law, his son Abram's wife. And they went forth together from Ur of the Chaldeans to go into the land of Canaan. But when they came to Haran, they settled there. The days of Terah were 205 years, and Terah died in Haran. On to chapter 12. Now the Lord said to Abram, "Go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you. And I will make of you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great, so that you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and him who dishonors you I will curse. And in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed." So Abram went, as the Lord had told him, and Lot went with him. Abram was 75 years old when he departed from Haran. And Abram took Sarai his wife, and Lot his brother's son, and all their possessions that they had gathered, and the people that they had acquired in Haran, and they set out to go to the land of Canaan. Now when they came to the land of Canaan, Abram passed through the land to the place at Shechem, to the oak of Moreh. At that time the Canaanites were in the land. Then the Lord appeared to Abram and said, "To your offspring I will give this land." So he built there an altar to the Lord who had appeared to him. From there he moved to the hill country on the east of Bethel and pitched his tent, with Bethel on the west and Ai on the east. And there he built an altar to the Lord and called upon the name of the Lord. And Abram journeyed on, still going toward the Negev. So this is the calling and the promise of God to Abram. And this is a hinge point for the whole Old Testament. The rest of the Old Testament, the rest of the Bible, is really about God fulfilling this promise. So we're going to take a closer look at it. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with you. And so let's see, I think this one will pull it up. And let me move into the full screen view here, hopefully. There we go. And so this passage, God's calling of Abram. And we notice at this point his name is Abram, even though I have Abraham up here. The name change will come in chapter 17. A couple of key things to note from the very beginning, that one, Sarai is barren. And so they are childless, and Abram is 75. And so not only do they have no children, but they really don't have any hope of having children. That they've probably let go of that dream. And furthermore, they really don't have any land. And so they are called to leave their kindred, their family, the land where they were sojourning. And God is telling him, "I'm going to lead you to a new land. I want you to go to the land that I will show you." So being barren and being landless, basically this couple has no future, that they don't have anything to pass on to anyone when they die. And so there's no land to serve as a family inheritance. And furthermore, there's no children to pass anything on to. So when this couple is dead, they're basically going to be forgotten. They have no future. They have no one to carry on their name. They have no land to remind people of them. So a very futureless couple And yet this is the couple that God calls and that God makes this promise to. And so God calls Abram and makes this promise to Abram. The calling, go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land I will show you. And so God calling him to go to a new place, a place that he doesn't know exactly where it's at, but the land that I will show you. And we read further on that Abram went. And so he answered the call, he was obedient. Then we began to unpack those first three verses. I will make you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great so that you will be a blessing. First thing I want to highlight is God's the one who's saying, I will do this. So God's not saying you're going to make your name great. You're going to make a great nation of yourself. This is God's project. And so God is saying that I will do this. And that's very important for us to keep in mind that this is the Lord's project. This is not Abram's dream. This is not him pursuing something he's always wanted to do, thinking he could become. No, this is God's project from the get-go. I will make you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great so that you will be a blessing. Next thing to highlight, great nation. A great nation requires or implies two things. A great nation needs to have a population. A great nation needs to have a land. You got to have a people and a place if you're going to be a great nation. You might have one or the other. You're not great. You're just numerous, or you got a place. But to be a great nation, Abram and Sarai are going to have a population. A people is going to have to issue forth from them, and they need to have a place. Second thing to highlight, God also says, I will make your name great. And so what's involved in having a great name? Well, in their context, that implies descendants. You're going to have children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, generations who will remember you and talk about you. If you don't have any children, then your name is going to be forgotten. Nobody's going to keep talking about you. Nobody's going to carry your name on. So to have a great name means that you're going to have children and grandchildren and great-grands who are going to remember you and keep talking about you and carry your name forward. The second thing a great name requires is a place or land that is associated with that name. And so that whenever people pass by that land, pass by that territory, they're remembered, they're talked about, their name is there. And so a great name requires children. A great name requires a place, requires land. Just kind of on a side note, when you graduate from Point Loma, you will be given the opportunity to have a great name. You will have the opportunity to buy a brick, an alumni brick, and you'll have your name engraved on that brick, and it will be put out there, and every generation of students that walks on campus, they'll step on your brick, they'll see your name, and you will be remembered. You will have a great name. And you can have a super great name if you send your kids here to point to everybody, out to everybody, your brick. And that's the brick of my mom and dad. That's the brick of my grandparents. I mean, just by virtue of buying a brick, you could have a great name here at Loma. All right, you get the picture. Okay, last thing, purpose. I will make you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great so that you will be a blessing. That so that is so important. The purpose of God choosing Abram is not merely to bless Abram, but to make Abram and Sarai into a blessing. You got to get that. That God's not choosing them simply because God feels sorry for them. That God's not choosing them simply because God sees that, oh, they're old and they're childless and they're landless and they're going to be forgotten. What nice thing can I do for them? God is up to something way bigger than that. Yes, God has compassion upon this couple, no doubt about it. But God is up to a much, much bigger project. And that project is to make Abram and his family into a blessing to all the families of the earth. So you got to get that. That God's purpose is not simply to bless Abram and Sarai, but to make them into a blessing so that all the families of the earth will be blessed. And then we go on and we get kind of this third element. I will bless those who bless you, and him who dishonors you I will curse, and in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed. So basically, this is a promise of God's presence. That God is saying, I got you covered. That whoever does you right, hey, I'm going to do them right. I'm going to bless them. And whoever does you wrong, hey, Abram, I'm standing with you. And if they do you wrong, I'm going to bring them under curse. And so God is promising God's presence to Abram. I got you covered. I'm going to bless those who bless you. Anyone dishonors you, they're coming under my curse because I'm with you, Abram. And then again, we see the purpose restated. In you, all the families of the earth shall be blessed. And so it's God's design, it's God's project to bless all the families of the earth through Abram's family. You got to get that. Now, this is important because it helps us to think a little bit about where we're at in the overall story. And so we've been through the first 11 chapters of Genesis, and what we've basically seen is a downward spiral. We had a good creation, then we had the fall, and we had things get incredibly violent to where God sees that all flesh is corrupted with violence. So we have the flood, and it's kind of a recreation, a decreation, recreation. But we discover that Noah and his family, they're really not any more righteous than the rest of humanity, and that the heart of humanity is still inclined towards evil. And finally, we get the Tower of Babel, where this group is determined to make a name for themselves instead of live in obedience to God and carry God's image, bear God's name out to creation. And so we're kind of at this point, what is God going to do? And God's already promised, I'm never going to destroy everything again with the flood. I'm never going to totally just decreate. So, I mean, I suppose God could still do that. Who would be left to say, God, you promised? God can kind of do what God's going to do. But here we see God make this move through Abram and Sarai to work to restore blessing to all the human race. And so this is God's saving move, redemptive move, rescue operation, that God is going to work through this couple and work through this couple to bring about blessing to the whole human race, to all the families of the earth. And we might think a little bit more in terms of why this couple. And one response is, well, because this couple can't boast about anything. That it's obvious that apart from God, they have no future, that they're going to be kind of just one and done. And their name will not be carried on. They'll be quickly forgotten. They'll just come to an end. And they cannot manufacture or produce a future for themselves. And so the only way they're going to have a future is if God grants it to them. And they're not going to be able to boast about anything that they did to accomplish that future. It will be sheer gift from God. God will be the one who is recognized and praised for it. So that's one response, that God will get all the glory. Everybody will recognize that it's because of God. Second possibility in terms of why God chose this couple is that this couple is pretty symbolic of where the human race is at, and that this couple has no future left to themselves. If God doesn't intervene, this couple will simply die and be forgotten. And in a very real way, that's where the human race is at this point. That if God doesn't intervene and do something, the whole human race will just implode. That it will just die out and come to an end because they're bent on evil. And evil always not only destroys others, but ultimately self-destructs. And so this couple is kind of like the human race, futureless, and is simply going to die out unless God does something. And so here we see God taking this couple, which in some ways is so symbolic and representative of the human race, can't save itself and is simply going to die out if God doesn't intervene. God works with this couple to bring blessing to the whole human race. Now, the promise can be summarized at kind of 3 points with the purpose. And this promise actually provides you a map for the first 5 books of the Old Testament. So aspect number 1 is children. That God promises Abraham children. You're going to be a great nation. You're going to be a great name. That means children, offspring, generations. This is the focus of the rest of Genesis. And so we'll spend several chapters following Abram and Sarai, is God going to bless them with a son? And then we'll follow the next generation with Isaac and Rebekah, and then the next generation with Jacob and what's going to happen to him. And on we go till finally we get to the end of Genesis chapter 50, and we discover that the family is established down in Egypt. And we move into Exodus chapter 1, and we discover that Egypt is just filled with Israelites, filled with the children of Israel, filled with the children of Abraham. And so, but that becomes, the focus of Genesis. And so if you think children, you got Genesis. And again, that's the first part of the promise. Second aspect of the promise, right in the center, is God's presence with Abraham and with his offspring, with his children. If God is not with them, with Abraham, there's no way he and Sarai are going to have children, and there's no way they're ever going to get the land. So right at the core of everything is the promise of God's presence. I'm going to bless those who bless you. Whoever dishonors you, I'm going to curse. We see this part of the promise especially come to the fore in the books of Exodus and Leviticus, so the second and third books of the New Testament. With Exodus, they are in slavery. Will God be with them? Is God with them in slavery? And we see, yes, he is. He liberates them from slavery through the work of Moses and the plagues. And then we're in the wilderness, and is God with them in the wilderness? Will God care for them in the wilderness, or will they just die out there as they're on their way to Sinai? And the answer is yes, God's with them. He begins to provide manna for them and water for them. And then they make a golden calf, and the question is even greater, is God going to be with them even though they sinned? And we get the answer, yes. God's commitment to be with them and to this promise is greater than their ability to send it away. And Exodus concludes with the building of the tabernacle and God moving in and dwelling in the midst of God's people in this tabernacle, this portable worship center. And so Exodus is all about the presence of God. Then we move to the third book, which is Leviticus. And Leviticus, it's a guide for living, or maybe better, surviving the presence of God. I mean, think about it for a moment. Do you want God living across the hall from you? Do you want God living down the hall from you or across the street from you? I mean, that can be kind of tough to survive the presence of God, given how we tend to live. And same thing for them. And so Leviticus is a gift for them from God in terms of how to live with God being present, how to survive the presence of God. So God's presence at the center of it all. Third aspect of the promise is land, the promised land. And this is the focus of the books of Numbers and Deuteronomy. Now, Numbers, they don't actually enter the land, but they actually arrive at the land twice. And the first time they don't have enough faith to enter and take possession of the land. And so they're going to spend 40 years in the wilderness. And then they're going to get back and have a second chance to enter the land. They don't go in the land in the book of Numbers, but Numbers is focused on the land and kind of the journey to the land. And then the book of Deuteronomy consists of Moses' farewell speeches in which he is preparing the people to enter into the promised land. Again, they don't actually enter, but Moses is getting them ready to enter into the land and how they are to live there. And he reissues the covenant to them. So these are kind of farewell instructions from Moses in terms of how to live in the land when they enter it and when they possess it, so that they can experience the blessings of God. They don't actually enter into the land until we get to the book of Joshua, and that begins kind of the next major section of the Old Testament. We'll eventually get there. Okay, so promise summarized threefold: children, God's presence, and land. And if you can remember those three things, then you have kind of a map of the first 5 books of the Old Testament. Most important, again, can't emphasize it enough, most important, this bottom line purpose is to work through Abram and Sarai to bless all the families of the earth. That this is God's solution to the downward spiral of Genesis 1 through 11. And so if you can remember that, if you can hold on to that the promise of children, God's presence, and land, and the purpose of that promise is to bless all the families of the earth, you are well on your way to getting the Old Testament and getting what God is up to. And this is the promise that will govern the rest of Scripture, God's determination, God's commitment to work through this family, not just to bless them, not just because God feels sorry for them, but to work through this family to bring blessing to the whole human race, to bring restoration. This is a major turning point in biblical narrative, in salvation history. So make sure you got it. Go ahead and shut this one down, and we will take a look then at the rest of chapter 12. See you in a minute.